The War for Mansoul by John Bunyan, as told by Ethel Barrett. Copyright 1998, Christian Light Publications Incorporated, Harrisonburg, Virginia. Another administration. The first thing Diabolus did was the obvious thing to do. He took possession of the beautiful castle in the center of Mansoul and made it his den. His headquarters, he would have corrected quickly. He garrisoned his warlords and more important soldiers within its high walls and forts. He strengthened and fortified it with all sorts of provisions against emergency. Soldiers of lesser importance scurried about the side streets and back streets and found homes for themselves and their families. Mansoul was not the same. The streets, the lovely avenues, the market square, the places of communion and the places for decision-making, all were cluttered with Diabolus's soldiers. But in spite of all this, he still did not feel secure. "Aren't you satisfied?" asked his warlords. "You accomplished the skullduggery task you started out to do." "Accomplished?" said Diabolus. "I have not even begun." And he called a high echelon meeting to discuss ways and means of furthering his purposes. The culprits gathered in the beautiful conference room of the castle and slouched around the conference table, their faces reflected in a highly polished surface. Diabolus took charge quickly. "The first thing we must do, my dear muckworms," he said, "is to remodel. And what does one do when one remodels? One sets up one thing and pulls down another, at pleasure." They all agreed. Each one had ideas of his own of how this should be done. "Some officials in Mansoul are up and obviously must come down," he said, "and some are down and must go up. So we are going to remodel." They began to squirm and mumble gleefully. "Quiet!" said Diabolus. "I know you have pet projects, my scrubby upstarts, but first things first, and one thing at a time. The first remodeling job is the mayor, His Excellency Lord Mayor Understanding." He eyed them with a cold stare until they were quiet. Then he muttered to himself, "Blueprints, blueprints. Where did I put those blueprints? Oh, yes, here they are." And he fumbled about and at last held them aloft. "Now, I submit these plans for a tower to be erected on the site indicated." And he spread the plans out for all to see. "It's right outside his palace windows," said Alecto. "Between his palace windows," said Beelzebub, "and the sun," Diabolus finished. "Make his palace nice and dark, do you see?" "But he's friendly to us. He complied with all the rest of the town gentry in letting us in," they all said at once. "Yes, I know," said Diabolus, not looking up from the blueprint. "He is also a very understanding man. He sees too much. That is something you seem to have overlooked, my snakes in the grass. He cannot be allowed to live in his former luster and glory." He straightened up. "By limited liberties, by living in darkness, he will be useful to us and a hindrance to Mansoul. We can depend on him to confuse and distort, but they can't be any more confused than they are already." "Oh, yes, they can," said the old master. "A darkened understanding has limitless possibilities. By being deprived of light, he can become as one born blind. And by being kept a prisoner—" "You intend to go that far?" they said. "Certainly, I intend to go that far." "Will you get away with it?" "He will be allowed to go out on parole occasionally, but only within his own bounds, no farther. And I shall set those bounds. Of course I'll get away with it. With understanding darkened and shackled, what can the rest of Mansoul do? Now, next, I would like—" A deafening roar reverberated through the castle, and the windows rattled, and the drapes swayed, and the golden dishes and goblets danced on the sideboards, and the dust bunnies that had accumulated since the invasion scurried across the room and caught on the fringe of the priceless rugs and tapestries, and the blueprints took off from the table with a swish like paper airplanes sent on errant flights. "Burn my brimstone," muttered Diabolus. "He's at it again. That roar is coming from the house of Mr. Conscience, and that, my croonies, is just what I was coming to, my next project. Mr. Conscience. He was partially responsible for letting us in, true, too. Come out from under the table." They came crawling out from whence they had dived, and slithered back onto the respective chairs, a bit sheepishly. Diabolus looked at them with solitude. "You were hand-picked whelps and mongrels, tried and false," he said softly. "Are you afraid of a little tantrum of poor old Mr. Conscience?" Their faces plainly said they were. "Where was I?" said Diabolus, ignoring both the noise and their reaction to it. "Oh, yes. It is not in my power to do away with Mr. Conscience. We must, unfortunately, put up with him." "But when he roars, sire, what'll we do when he roars?" said Alecto. "This is terrible. I'm secretary of this council and I can't even take notes. The table is shaking so." "You will take notes of our treachery as best as you can," said Diabolus. "And the rest of you rogues will pay attention. We must get a campaign under way." "But you cannot dispose of Mr. Conscience the way you can Lord Understanding," they cried. "True, but we can render him impotent." "Not entirely." "True, but we can make him look like a fool when he does cry out." "But we can never—" "Listen to me," Diabolus said. He now measured his words and spoke with such conviction that for a moment they were quiet. "With the proper tactics we can deal the one most devastating blow possible. We can make him look ridiculous. Hear me. First we debauch him. We lead him into sin. Then we harden his heart with vanity. We keep him so deluded that when he is merry he will do the very things he bellows against. We spread the rumor that he is subject to fits. When he is stricken with thoughts of King Shaddai and raises his voice like thunder, it will be easy to convince the town people that it is one of his bad days. When he tries more mild reasoning, we will convince them that he is just prattling. But, sire, and when he gets too troublesome, we lull him to sleep, so he will stay in a stupor for weeks at a time. Master, my lord, quiet! When we get finished, the people of Mansoul will take whatever Mr. Conscience has to say with their tongues in their cheeks. He will bother no one." They were all silent for a full moment. Then, "But Mr. Conscience will never be wholly yours," they said at last. Diabolus's eyes were like fire. "Perhaps not, but we can convince them that he is quite mad." He walked over to a window and looked out towards the house of Mr. Conscience. "No," he said, "he will never be wholly ours." They adjourned the meeting then, and shuffled out dejectedly, their spirits quite dampened. But not for long. They lost no time in getting these projects started. First the tower was built to keep Lord Understanding in darkness, and guards were posted so that he had to stay within bounds. All propaganda getting into him was carefully gone over and thoroughly mixed up and confused so that he was quite helpless. And as Diabolus's campaign flourished, poor Mr. Conscience was despised and neglected by the people of Mansoul. If at odd times he did disrupt them, Diabolus would run to the rescue and make this his subject in one of his deceptively chatty talks to the town. "Hush, my Mansoul," he would croon. "Are you not more content than you ever were before? You know you are. Consider how I have served you, even to the full extent of my power, and given you the very best that I have or could procure for you in all the world. Your liberty has been enlarged by me. I found you shackled, and I set you free. You have no laws. I do not hold you to account for your doings. I've let you live and let live with as little control from me as I have from you. What more do you want? There, now, that's better. And don't let that horrid rumbling disturb you. It's just twaddle," he would go on, warming to his subject. "That's all it is. And with all Mr. Conscience high talk, you hear nothing of Shaddai himself now, do you? Do you?" He would wait dramatically for the answer that never came. "Well," he would say at the end, as that settled everything, and then he would think to himself, "There, that should hold them for a while." But he never did believe it. for he knew that every outcry of Mr. Conscience against the sin of Mansell was the voice of God in him to them. Mr. Conscience was clearly the one creature Diabolus feared most of all in Mansell. Now, as Diabolus had said, all the remodeling wasn't tearing down. Indeed, some of the changes that did him the most good were the officials he put in power. And of all officials he put into power, Lord Wilbywil was the most important. He had, to begin with, privileges peculiar to himself in the town of Mansell, and together with these he was a man of great strength, resolution, and courage. Diabolus was thinking of his attributes as he waited for Wilbywil to show up at the castle for an appointment one evening. Strength, resolution, and courage. Well, actually, thought Diabolus, Wilbywil was headstrong. Proud and willful was what he was. He was a good man to have on your side. Play on his pride, that's it. Make him one of the great ones. He's the greatest deterrent to Mr. Conscience you can possibly have. Old Conscience cannot be annihilated, no, but he can be militated against, yes. And Wilbywil is the man for the job. Eh? Said Diabolus out loud, looking up. Wilbywil was standing before him. I took the liberty of ushering him in, said an underling. You were talking to yourself, said Wilbywil. Something about man for the job. Oh, yes, yes. Sit down, my lord, said Diabolus. Business, always business, said Wilbywil pleasantly. Idiot, thought Diabolus. He's going to be garrulous as usual. Can I get nothing done without talking trivia? Aloud, he said, yes, always business. Matter of fact, I was thinking man for the job, and I was thinking of you. Of me, said Wilbywil. Good grief, thought Diabolus. Does he have to repeat everything I say? He pushed a box of cigars forward and rustled some papers on his desk to compose himself. I sent for you, he said at last, because you were one of the first chumps to be hoodwinked, the first luminary to accept my counsel and advise opening Eargate and letting me in. And you have seemed willing to serve me since my reign began here. Also, you are a very stubborn, headstrong man, and I have a great affection for you. Oh, thank you, sire, said Wilbywil. May I speak freely? Oh, yes, 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 yes. Go ahead. I have always been a man of considerable importance in this town. Wilbywil cleared his throat. If I do say so myself, I am a man capable of making decisions. Ah, yes, sighed Diabolus, looking back innocently. Quite frankly, I will not be put in a subordinate position. No, of course. Diabolus's innocent stare remained intact. I think I rate a position of authority. Diabolus almost laughed out loud, but he controlled himself. A position of authority, he said, almost too heartily. Now he was repeating, but of course, that is exactly what I was thinking when you came in. You were? said Wilbywil, delighted. I said I was, thought Diabolus. Why does he keep repeating we go around in circles? I was. You were? I was. What a dreary bore. Out loud he said, I was. To be sure, said Wilbywil. Diabolus got up and walked over to stare out the window. With this kind of a fool in power, he thought, there is no limit to the heights I can reach. Underneath his lofty exterior lies the soul of a string saver. He turned to face Wilbywil. I'll give you a responsible position. I'll make you captain of the castle, governor of the wall, keeper of the gates. Wilbywil started to speak, but Diabolus put his hand up to indicate that he was not finished. We'll put a clause in your contract that nothing in the town of Mansell can be done without your consent. How do you like that? Wilbywil nodded to indicate that he did. And we'll give you a secretary, Diabolus went on. I already have a man lined up for the job. Fellow by the name of Mr. Mind. Just imagine, the whole town will have to kowtow to the whims of will and mind. How do you like that? Diabolus did not wait for an answer. He rushed on. You can be the big boss, under my supervision, of course. You'll be the biggest yes-man, fool, statesman. Statesman is the word I want. The biggest statesman Mansell has ever known. Oh, thank you, sir, sighed Will. My pleasure, said Diabolus. Of course, you will take an oath of fidelity to me, just as a matter of form. Oh, yes, of course, sire. And Mr. Conscience? Oh, I understand about him, sire. And Will made a circle around with his index finger, pointing to his head. Exactly, said Diabolus, making a similar gesture. It would be better if you did not even talk to him. Oh, and when you and Mr. Mine get your offices ready and clean out the old files, if there should be any old parchments hanging around, would you... Of course, said Will. All old contracts, laws, pledges, and fidelities shall be thrown out. We understand each other, said Diabolus gravely, and stood to indicate that the interview was over. Thank you for giving me this appointment, said Will. It is good to know that I shall still be on my own master. After all, a person of my standing... Of course, said Diabolus. Will whirled around, went to the door, opened it, and turned. I am the master of my fate, he blustered. Yes. I am the captain of my soul. Yes. The door closed. You are a fool, said Diabolus softly. There is no bigger fool than Will with a whip in his hand. A gust of wind came through the window and blew out the candle and left him there in the darkness, his red eyes glowing. As the days went on, it became apparent that the success of Diabolus' strategy depended upon his choice of officials. Diabolus was very scrupulous about this. Inasmuch as Mansoul was the most ancient of corporations before he came to it, he feared that if he did not maintain greatness, they might object that he had done them an injury. And so that they might see that he did not intend to lessen their grandeur or take from them any of their advantageous things, he carefully chose officers who would content them as well as please him. Some changes were necessary, of course. For instance, Lord Mayor Understanding was temporarily disabled, so it became necessary to appoint a new mayor. And Lord Lustings was just the man for the job. His platform was, I want what I want when I want it. And as he had no eyes or ears, he could be depended upon to fall in line. And then, of course, a new town recorder was necessary, with poor Mr. Constance completely unfit for the job, and completely unable to keep his nose out of the affairs of Mansoul. The man to be appointed had to be capable with this. He was. His name was Forgetgood. He could remember nothing but mischief and do it with a delight. He was just naturally prone to do things that were hurtful. He kept Mr. Conscience in a coma most of the time. Ah, yes, said Diabolus. When those who sit aloft are corrupt themselves, they corrupt the whole region and country where they are. He was sitting at his desk in the castle, going over some official papers. Put the right men in power, he said, and everything else takes care of itself. What have we here? Ah, yes, the list of new aldermen and constables. Fine. Mr. Haughty, Mr. Hardheart, Mr. Pitiless, Mr. Cheating, Mr. Incredulity. Who is he? Oh, yes. He's the fellow they call Unbelief. Surly chap, he'll do very well. And Mr. Falsepeace, he's a good one. Mr. Atheism, I've always fancied him. Yes, these'll do fine. And the bailiffs and sergeants, oh, fine. They're all relatives of the alderman. I guess I can okay this. He scribbled his signature across it. Then he reached across his desk towards his box of brimstone cigars. Yes. Put the right men in power, and everything else falls in place. With these officials installed, things would undoubtedly go comfortably from bad to worse.